Okay.
So, yeah, it's the question about proof. By identifying the proper hierarchy of premises. I was like, one must trace backward the order of logical dependence terminating with the perceptually given.
Right.
I was just like, yeah, okay. Like, isn't there also inference? What about, I remember earlier I wrote this down. He said that proof is derivation of a conclusion from antecedent premises. So you're taking premises and you're jumping to a conclusion, but here he's saying it's identifying a proper hierarchy of premises.
It's part of the process, I think. He's saying that whole process of doing that would include tracing the logical dependence, logical relationship between concepts. That's mainly what he's doing. I guess you could call that a process of inference. You're trying to infer from some premise another one, or checking the connection. Inference would be more like induction. Like just from the fact that the ground is wet, you can infer that it rained. And I guess that's more saying the claim you're making, or you put things together and to make a conclusion. That would be more of an inference. This is taking that whole argument and seeing is it valid or not. Like, is it a valid and sound argument?
How would that work with the rain example you're saying? Well, in that case, there's only one premise: the ground is wet.
Yeah, that would be a matter of just us running by an inference. I'm not saying that's a process of proof. I'm just saying that would be an example of an inference.
So how would you then prove the conclusion using this idea of identifying the hierarchy of premises?
Well, you can prove that it rained. I guess it would be just going backwards the other direction. Like you take the fact that you're saying it rained. What do you need to know that it rained? You have to say you observed that the ground is wet, or you say that the clouds are gray, or you say there was a forecast that you were hearing about, or something to that effect. You're taking that claim that it rained, and what would you need to know that it rained? Like, what does it rely on? What premise does it require?
Well, how does the proper hierarchy of premises fit into?
Well, that would be more like got a more abstract claim, like it rained, to something more concrete, to say the ground is wet. Because you can observe when we're trying to say it rained, you don't see the rain in front of you right now. You need something else to say that. You need something more perceptual to demonstrate that it's in fact true. I think you need to make it more perceptual, which would be look at the ground, is it wet? That would be one way to reduce it to something more perceptual and make it more concrete. And that would be kind of the process of proof here. You're going backwards in how you got there.
Okay, I can see I'm not getting this, so let's skip it. Otherwise, it could take up the whole tutorial or whatever. Yeah. So I'll mark it and I'll skip that one.
It's essentially reduction, is what he's saying.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it just didn't fit in with. Well, at least in my mind, it didn't fit in with what he said earlier. But that's okay. I don't want to get too caught up in the one thing, so we'll just skip it, and I can sit and think about it later. Okay, let's see what this is. Oh, I was confused here what he meant by the propositions, particularly with fundamental concepts, whenever you sense that these are not clear to you. So when he's talking about reduction, he's talking about reorganizing your knowledge, and then start with concepts which are elements of propositions. What does that mean, elements of propositions? I looked that up and it was like propositional logic, not and or, but I don't know if that's what he means.
Yeah, or is actually regular logic, really. That's part of normal logic.
Okay, so that's got nothing to do. I don't know logic stuff.
Right.
Propositional logic. Yeah, so he's saying that what are the elements of propositions? What does that mean?
In this context, I think He's just saying what are propositions made out of? They're made of concepts. A proposition is just multiple concepts in a phrase.
Okay, so he's not talking about some specific set of
No.
concepts. He's just saying, like, in any sentence, in anything someone says, like, you don't worry about the proposition, just try get the concepts first.
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
that's what he's
All
saying.
right. All right, cool. I overcomplicated it.
Yeah.
Let's see what this is. You know, this is kind of touched on in some of the that Don Watkins commentary thing of like, I was like, how do you know you can only reduce the essence and those kind of questions? Maybe they're a bit too, those questions are like, they're better off written than, yeah, I mean, some of this we've discussed fundamental concepts and I still didn't really get an answer in the forum. I feel like I was just reducing polygons and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, this one's like, we'll skip this one. This one's pretty hard. We sort of touched on it. We weren't really sure on some of that. So, cool. I'm just gonna change the color. Okay, we can probably skip this too. I wouldn't worry about. I mean, if you can think of something quickly, then we can do it. But otherwise, I just think it's like,
I would just think as far as proof and inference, I would either look at that book about critical thinking or look up those terms more generally first. Because, I mean, forget even just objectivism and how they use proof and inference. I mean, I think those are basic concepts that are important to understand, at least on a basic general level, even if not specifically the objectivist way.
Yeah. Okay.
That should help make things a bit clearer as well.
Yeah, okay. Cool. Yeah, Rand's razor. Have you ever consciously used it in anything other than philosophy? No, that's cut across.
Really. I've never really used it. I mean, I never really thought about it specifically.
Yeah.
But just don't multiply things beyond necessity. Don't overcomplicate it, basically, is what that means, I think.
Yep. Why get rid of that? Whatever. Okay, I'm down to intrinsicism and subjectivism.
Yes.
This is something I was thinking about because I was trying to explain to someone like the whole importance of this thing, the problem of universals, and I was like, the way I explained it was like, take this bicycle. How do you know what makes this bicycle the same as that bicycle? And the person just like, well, you ride both of them. They're bicycles. Like, what exactly? How is this a discussion in philosophy? What's wrong with these people? And it's, on the one hand, like I do sort of get sometimes I do get like, wow, these kind of conversations are pretty important about like identifying what makes something the thing it is. But then when I come to explain it, it's like, it's true. If you just point to one bicycle and another, someone can just say like, so how would you explain like the problem of universals in a way that you think makes obvious that it's makes obvious its importance?
I think it's kind of intuitive to say that knowing a bicycle is a bicycle and that another bicycle is also a bicycle is just good to do. I mean, by doing it, you can know like this is important. And you could ask, well, why is it actually a problem? Who would think this is a problem?
Yeah.
In a way, answering that question can reflect a lot about the way you think. Like, why do you say it's a bicycle? Why do you say these two things are a bicycle? Why do you call them just separate things? Like bicycle one, bicycle two. Why is that all you're saying? It might not be obvious why it's important because you just go through day to day, just you know what things are what, and you don't have problems. I think it comes more into an issue when you get into questioning things about life, like what is good, what is a career, especially if you're in a science field. You'll certainly wonder why something is a certain way. You're right on the basic level, like bicycles and whatnot. People probably wouldn't ask. They wouldn't be that interested in what a universal is.
Yeah.
If that gets more to a very technical point that maybe only specific mathematicians or philosophers might be interested in. But you could make it more the only way I think you could really demonstrate to someone is saying, well, how do you know what is good? And people can understand why people disagree about what's good. Why do they disagree? Does it mean there's no right answer? There's no right or wrong, or things like that? How do you know those sort of things?
Yeah. Right. So it's like the same question, but it's more abstract. So like, what makes a bicycle a bicycle? What makes good good? It's the same.
Right.
It's the same thing, but obviously in terms of bicycle, it doesn't. The importance isn't conveyed because, like you're saying, people already know, and so you don't. It's hard to see. Okay, well, if you have a theory for why something, what makes something universal, you can then apply that to other concepts like good or bad or purpose or whatever else.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because concretely, when you talk about that, it's like nobody really disagrees exactly what's an apple. Like all these things are, anything that looks like an apple is an apple. It's not really a problem to people. They might even see it as a problem. It's only when you get to those big questions do you recognize there might be a problem.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, makes sense. All right, let's see what this is. Okay, some of these, like if you don't really know straight away, we can just skip because they're probably just like extra type questions on philosophy itself. But you can see he talks about Kant and then he's saying subjectivism, and then he goes on to talk about the decisive concepts. Kant established 12 concepts, the so-called categories, calls them decisive concepts, and there's a link to the categories. I was wondering where they actually stand in terms of like doing the most work, like, or fundamentals of thought, his categories, because he's got stuff here. If you go to the page, it's like substance, quantity, quality, relation, play, state, posture, state, action, passion. Posture's a bit weird, but
Yes,
whatever.
True.
But yeah, like where did it? Well, I wonder why I can't pick them. Like maybe they are fundamental to some of them are fundamental.
One thing I'd say about Kant is I feel like Rand and Peikoff don't really get him. I don't think they give a fair criticism of Kant.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Kant is wrong, but I think they don't really criticize him for the right reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I'm not a big fan of Rand when she talks about other philosophers, like, except Aristotle, she's pretty accurate on him, but I think by and large, she doesn't really give a fair hearing to Kant or say Plato or whoever.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as those fundamental categories, I think Kant would be more saying that you don't derive them from perception. As far as I understand, that you have to use reason on its own, pure reason, to find those and to discover what these foundations are, rather than objectivism, which would use you perceive the world in front of you. It's more direct. For Kant, it's more abstract. It's not that Kant rejects entirely perception, but that everything's grounded on something non-perceptual.
Correct. It was interesting because it says Kant is Aristotelian, except for these 12 concepts, which he calls the categories. And they're, in his system, they're the decisive concepts. So that's why I was interested in, why did he pick those as the decisive concepts? Surely I actually found his. I quoted Aristotle's before, but I was like, that maybe there is something there to these concepts. It's like quantity, quality, relation, modality, and under each one there's like under modality, possibility, existence, necessity. These are pretty, I've seen these come up a lot. Relation,
Yes.
inherence, and subsistence. I don't know what that is. Causality and dependence, vaguely understand it. Community, reciprocity, it's pretty weird. I don't know what that is. Negation, limitation, totality, plurality. Like, yeah, I can see how these are. What do you think of them as far as like doing the most work and thinking? Because it's
I,
interesting that he vetoed those 12 as the like base for the whole philosophy or whatever. If it's decisive concept, I don't know if it's a base, but
it's hard for me to say because I haven't studied him much. I can't really say other than I know it's mostly grounded on the process of reasoning reasoning itself is how you get there. You're not using observations to find out what
yeah,
these are. I mean,
yeah,
I could see why you would say those things are important. I could make arguments why they matter. It's just more like, where is he getting the idea from? He's grounding it not on something in reality or in perception, but in the nature of reason, something to that effect. So Kant is really he's not about observation, really. I mean, there's observation in he takes, he talks about it, says there's limits to using reason within the human mind, but essentially he's really working strictly abstract. That's why some people have a hard time understanding him or reading him because it's so abstract, not really concrete at all. So it's
yep,
really hard to read it and make sense of it.
yeah, yeah, okay. Um, yeah, it was still just interested in me why I know they're like not based in observation, but like maybe there is maybe just noticed that a lot of concepts were connected to those, and the reason I was like getting at that is because well if they're so important to Kant and Kant is such a big important philosopher, maybe I could these would be like some good fundamental concepts to that do a lot of work because the guy was also a genius. So if you identify his um, if here's what he considers fundamental. Anyway, just I was just curious because like why those? And Aristotle had similar like concepts. What were they called? Uh, 10 highest categories. Like these guys think a
Yeah.
lot and they identified these as important areas. So it made me think a lot. Like maybe these do the most work. That's what I was. But yeah,
Yeah.
who
I
knows?
mean, I would say in that sense, yeah, that's what makes him kind of Aristotelian. I mean, I don't think God disagrees, but it's just that Kant does it the wrong way. Not that he doesn't do, like, categorization is really the Aristotelian thing, I would say.
Right.
But Kant they would think, just does it wrong. Not that he doesn't do it. And I
This.
think a lot of those concepts sound important because Kant and Hume also really defined Western philosophy.
Oh,
So
really?
anything, really, Kant only wrote his stuff about philosophy because of Hume. Like, Hume asked the good questions, Kant answered them basically.
Oh,
And that really shaped Western philosophy, in particular from then on out until like the 20th century. Then things shifted more, but these are just a really fundamental figuring what problems exist, what distinctions exist. And the ancient Greeks, of course, but Kant was another big shift in philosophy. For good or
because
bad,
of
and he was a
because
big
of
figure.
Hume's questions.
Yeah, Kant said, like, Hume woke Kant up from a slumber, is how Kant described it.
Okay. Well,
Like, Kant was awoken from a dogmatic slumber, and he started writing philosophy as a result.
mm, um, just like when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and then they're like, "We fear,
Yes,
we fear we woke a slumbering giant." It's
exactly.
funny. Um, are there anything? Do you know if there's anything in like if you read Hume and Kant, would you read it purely for historical interest, or is there actually like thinking value in there? Like it can teach you to. There's any side, I don't know, a lot of side points or ways of thinking, unique tools to think about things.
Well,
You,
I find Kant a bit too dense to really even appreciate. I don't like it.
yeah, okay.
Like, it's too much to me, and I don't get much value of it, so I just leave it aside. I don't claim to know much about Kant, but it's like, I know some amount, but I don't see any value in going further.
Yeah.
Also because it's translation. Translation makes things more difficult too.
Yeah. Okay.
Like if it was in the original, that'd be different. If I could read German, but I can't. But Hume is Scottish, so you read English anyway, so there's nothing to translate for Hume. Hume is more valuable, I think, because he asks the questions, and I think he phrases things really well. And he's more skeptical than Kant. He's not about giving answers as much as asking questions.
Oh, cool. That's interesting.
So I think Hume is worthwhile. More historical for me, but he's interesting.
What about Locke in terms of not historical? Because I'm not interested in just like knowing stuff that just.
Never tried him.
I never tried. Okay.
He's a guy I would want to read. He seems valuable enough.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Something else actually. There's some schools that teach philosophy. Like I've seen them here and overseas, and they're like that. They never teach Aristotle. I notice sometimes they're all just Plato, and then different philosophers up from there, like Plotinus, whatever his name is.
Yeah.
See if I can find it. School. There's like two of them. School of Practical Philosophy, and then there's these other ones that are all over the world, and they never. It's so weird that they never teach, like they're like the greatest philosophers, the one that has influenced the world the most, and it's always, there's never anything about Aristotle. It's always skipping Aristotle and any Aristotelian philosopher. What do you think of that? Like, why was he just like a marginal?
I think it's just more of which schools you have to look into. I mean, I'm familiar with American schools that have enough about Aristotle and the Greeks that, I mean, Aristotle is definitely a giant. I can think of some philosophers that really care a lot about Aristotle, but I can't think of any examples of schools that, I kind of know what you mean, but I don't.
They're like,
it's more a matter of where you look.
Because they say, well, I've seen this in two different schools. They're like the greatest minds of East and West that have stood the test of time, from Epicurus to Plato, Patanjali to Confucius, Krishna to Sri, whatever that guy's name is. So they're just completely, anyway, I don't know, it's just curious.
That's interesting. I was surprised they didn't say like Plato and Aristotle, like they usually go hand in hand.
Yeah, I don't know. I've seen two of those schools that just skip Aristotle completely as well. All right, whatever. Just getting these categories. These categories she's set up are probably, like, you probably need, they're concepts you probably need to read more philosophy for, like platonic realism, Aristotelian, nominalism, intrinsicism, and subjectivism. I was just trying to get my head around all these categories. Like, so Platonic and Aristotelian realism, she categorizes them as intrinsicism. That's sort of what she's come up with.
Yeah.
And then nominalism is a kind of subjectivism. Is that?
Yes.
Can you have a nominalist intrinsicist or a realist subjectivist?
I don't think so. Maybe there's some way, but not that I can think of. They seem contradictory.
And what's the relationship of all these things to rationalism?
There's two senses of the word rationalism. The more traditional one that people use, they mean philosophers that focus on rationality, like Kant in particular. And that sense is fine. You could even call it like Locke a rationalist in the sense that he cares about reason.
Call it what? Locke it
rational. Or actually, no, forget Locke. Usually rationalism is used as those who focus more on abstract thinking, like Kant. Just focusing on abstract, or like Kant. But empiricism would be the opposite, like more focused on observation, or all knowledge is derived from observation, which would be Locke.
Okay.
So rationalism being knowledge is derived, everything's derived from reason. Empiricism, everything's derived from observation.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the word. Go ahead.
No, then what, in that case, what do they consider reason? Like, because obviously it's different definition from objectivism too, then. It's all like,
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's a wide range of what exactly is reason, um, what exactly is observation. But usually the philosophers are at least clear on what they think. Like, whatever they define as rationality, a rationalist might say that everything derives from the use of reason. Reason on its own, pure reason, blah, blah, blah. They might not reject observation, but everything derives from reason. Like, the foundation is reasoning.
even
And
the
that
observations.
probably, yes,
Okay.
in some way or another. They have varied arguments of why that is. Empiricism would be
Oh,
just
okay.
that in some way or another, everything's grounded on observation of the world. They range in how much they think that abstractions are real. Some might reject abstractions completely. Some might say that, oh, rationality is important, but everything's based on observation, which is more like objectivism, like everything's grounded on observation. And ultimately, like, even your reasoning trace, you use that to trace down to observation, reduction, all that.
So it's basically a split between people who say everything comes from observation and another school that says everything comes from reason, whatever that is, whatever their definition of
Yes.
reason is. Yeah, okay.
And sometimes
And
within objectivism, the word rationalism is just used to say somebody who's floating abstractions, ungrounded thinking, or just came up with a statement and just deduce everything from that. That would be rationalism sometimes within
and
objectivism.
and then how does the subjectivist fit into the rationalist versus empiricist thing?
It could be either way. You could be a subjectivist rationalist or subjectivist empiricist, I'm sure.
What is the defining feature of a subjectivist then?
Subjectivism usually, I think it's usually thought of, at least within objectivism, as there's no one answer. There's no right answer, I guess you would say. There's many ways of looking at it with no right way. Or subjective being your thinking is not determined by facts as much as it is emotion or impulse or
Or
intuition
reason?
rather than reason.
Oh, okay. So this thing called reason, which people define differently, can't be subjective. But it's so strange because everyone's defining like, okay, reason is this, someone's saying reason is that, and then so it's weird to think that you can't. Anyway, I don't know. It's still these categories are pretty confusing. Like there's
I
so
mean,
many of them.
they get weird when you mix them. But imagine a subjectivist, yeah, like you say, a subjectivist realist. I'm sure there's one out there, and I can't imagine what it'd be, but it just goes to show what kind of weird combos you can have, really just depending on how you define things or how you reason things out, the
I
arguments you
get,
present.
well, actually, now that I think about it, maybe so the realist is there is a a world or reality external to you, maybe,
Yes,
and it does exist. Whereas the subjectivist is like you are the reality. That's the
kind of,
key. And then
or that you're perceiving reality, you never perceive reality. You just perceive some, you're relating to it. There's no truth, but there's maybe a feeling of what's right and things like that.
and then
And that even reasoning is subjective because there's not any factual basis to it. It just does whatever it wants, what it wishes. No particular rule to it.
and have you read much about nominalism? Like what would a nominalist are they all subjectivists or are some also like do some also believe that there's a reality out there or what?
Well, I'll phrase it this way. So realism would be: is there a reality out there? Are things based on a facts of the matter? It's saying, does that exist or not? Then another question is, are you able to find out what that is? Some people might say it exists, but we'll never know.
Yeah, okay.
Somebody else could say it exists and here's a way to know. So a nominalist would be maybe more like there's maybe a real world, but there's no way to really know it. Would be more like it. So you just say Wittgenstein is the example of nominalism. Things are just like some pragmatic label you give it. A thing looks like an apple, and that's the only reason you call it an apple. There's no universal. It's just a thing you call it for practical reasons.
Yeah, I can see how that.
Not any fact. Yeah.
I can see how that. Well, I don't know. He does use. I read resemblances. That's how I interpreted the
Yes,
bicycle
family
thing. Well,
resemblances.
yeah. So
You say, is it merely because they look similar and it seems right, so you just put it together?
yeah.
Or is it because there's some fact of the matter that led you to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I could sort of see how that would work, as in, like, if you just say resemblances are there in reality, and like some things kind of look the same purpose, like the bicycle, so you just kind of put them together. There's no real rules how you do it. I can see that having some weight as an argument, like, or being reasonable. All right, let's skip that, because that's like it's one of those. So it's like it's confusing. You need more knowledge of philosophy. Not particularly that relevant.
But I think you got the idea, though. Just the general, like, realism is an important term. You got that. Nominalism and realism, I guess, in this context, and subjectivism. You seem to understand that. Okay.
This is about Aristotle, so you may or may not know this, but I'll ask it anyway. So this is a whole section about Aristotle and how he did think that, concepts were, he was a realist, which meant he thought that there was a world out there and there was no other dimension, it was just the world out there.
Yes.
Unlike Plato, who said maybe there's like another dimension where the forms are projected or whatever.
Yes.
And then he thought the essences of things. So what did he come up with? Like a form and substance.
Yes.
And the form and the substance are both right out there, and the form is directly sort of impressed upon consciousness. And then, so Peikoff says, like, if he thought that things are just impressed on you automatically, how did he have an implicit recognition of context and hierarchy? Because that was the difference between Aristotle and others, right? Like, here we go. Here's a quote. Universals are not otherworldly, but they are still phenomena intrinsic in reality. Aristotle's answer comes down to passive receptivity or intuition, which is what I said. The mind must simply gaze outside, awaiting their imprint. The intrincist, so this would include Aristotle, regards knowledge as a series of thunderbolts from beyond. It's a contextless deliverance, each piece of knowledge. Neither of these two approaches can identify cognitive necessity of integration, reduction, or proof. Neither, left to its own devices, feels the need for an art of non-contradictory identification. So yeah, I was curious, how did Aristotle then implicitly recognize context and hierarchy if he's got this passive approach?
Well, as far as the passive approach, I think Peikoff may think it could lead you in a bad direction. Like, it might make sense, but if you don't treat it correctly, you'll go in a bad direction. I think that's one thing he's saying. That it doesn't completely ruin Aristotle. It's just a bad trajectory to build on. And going from backwards from there, what is implicit about it? What is an implicit recognition of context and hierarchy for Aristotle? I'm not sure exactly what Peikoff is thinking, so I'm not going to go by what he's trying to say, but I agree with the statement. I do agree with that, in the sense that Aristotle thought about categorizing the world. Some things are more basic than others. So I mean, that's hierarchy. Like, you could have biology, you could have physics, you have metaphysics. Like, he organized the world in that way, in all those different ways. So you could say, we at least understood what a hierarchy is. And he talked about it, at least implicitly, even if he didn't say the word.
Right.
And context, as far as observation being important, because Aristotle is more of he basically came up with science, and the whole act of observing things in the world to understand it. Like he more or less studied zoology. He studied animals in particular. That was his main topic. Biology, I guess you could say.
But how did he? Okay, I get it. So it's built in the hierarchy. Like he often presents stuff in hierarchies. But then, how? What about logic? Like, how do you get to like if you believe that everything just impresses you from the outside and your brain automatically does it? Like, how does he?
Well, that would just there's a relationship with reality that facts have a relationship to each other that a fact can be, or just recognizing that something's true or false. Something can't be true, false, or neither. Or something is a fact is either true or false. It's trying to make a relationship from that. Whether or not something was impressed on you or not has nothing to do with the validity or soundness of an argument. Logic would be more abstracting away the particulars and finding a relationship among facts.
Do you know anything about how he came up with the topic of logic?
No.
Oh, okay.
That I don't know.
What about what do you think of this with like I think he mentioned this, but now I'm not sure because I wrote the question, but with like the reason that Plato won more popularity is because his view of concepts was more logical. Like if you passively absorb a concept, that would mean the concept is in another intellect. Do you think that's the reason why Plato won, or is there more? It's way more depth to it.
Well, why do you say he won? Where did
I just thought Plato influenced way more people for longer periods. It was more popular, influenced religion, and then tons of people followed religions. Like his argument. So I was curious if it all pivoted on the argument of concepts, because his does make more sense.
As far as I understand, not really. It seemed more to do with what could be integrated in Christianity better. I think that's really the only reason. I mean, Neoplatonism is a basically Platonic influenced philosophy, but that's essentially Christian. It's mostly Christian thinkers.
Neo-Platonism. What makes it neo versus just Platonic?
Well, let me look this up exactly. It was certainly way after he died, for one. Neoplatonism.
Yeah.
I guess it's a way of taking philosophy and incorporating Christian thought into it. I guess in that way you could call it neo, because incorporating more ideas from outside of Plato.
Okay, cool. I mean, yeah, I got from that passage that he did win. He was more popular, and then I thought it pivoted on the concepts.
Maybe it is the concepts, because that's the part that's compatible with Christianity.
Yeah.
And you could say because of that compatibility gave Plato a lot more credence, I guess.
Yeah.
More success than Aristotle. Certainly Christians appreciated Aristotle, but Plato had a bigger impact than Aristotle early on. Aristotle's not as big an impact immediately.
Okay. Going on to the next. Just reading it. Paste it in there. Okay, oh yeah, so I was like, what's the difference between these subjectivists who reject how do you, I don't get how you reject percepts anyway, and detach all logic from the world with its linguistic. What am I asking here? I don't know what I'm asking here. Maybe I mean the nominalists. Oh, okay. No,
No, I
he's
think
talking
you're
about.
right.
Okay, well, what about the second question? Why would a subjectivist reject? Oh no. Okay, so the subjectivists stress sensations, but not consciousness. Yeah, I was like really confused. I was just confused by that explanation. Anyway, maybe I don't know enough about those philosophies to make sense of any of it. But
Subjectivist isn't really a term used in philosophy at large usually.
yeah,
I only really hear it mentioned within objectivism.
yeah, okay,
That's the only time I really hear about it. I would say subjectivism is, or having that view of thinking fits more with perceptual level thinking because of the large variety of things you could see in the world. You could see so many kinds of bikes. How could there possibly be a right answer? There's so many ways to live your life. How could there possibly be a one answer? You just observe so many things. There's no way to integrate it all. So it's just anything goes, and the most extreme way of putting it. Does that make sense?
yeah, it does. I don't know. I guess I was like even here in this section, there are just things in here that I just didn't get, like modern empiricism. But what? Why does modern empiricism, if it thinks everything is derived from sensory data, then think that everything is linguistic castles in the air?
That's more of a historical question.
Oh, okay.
Why would that be? I think it's because it's a lot to do with the history of philosophy. There, I don't want to give you a whole
Yeah,
word
yeah,
salad about it, but
yeah. Okay.
logical positivists, that's the term you need to know.
All right.
That would answer your question if you're curious to look into it later.
Just as long, I don't know, maybe not. I'll just put it down as history of philosophy questions, and then maybe in the future.
And right, logical positivism, it's a viewpoint of philosophy that's really the reason why. But I don't want to get into all the details right
Yeah,
now.
I don't want to either. Like, if
But,
it's got no practical purpose, it's pointless.
but
So,
just knowing that term is enough.
yeah, okay. Can you, do you think there's any practical reason someone, a layman, would study history of philosophy? Like, it's not like it's going to help you identify, I don't know, like, what would it actually achieve? It just seems like a kind of, what's it called? This thing you just do sitting on sofas and getting nowhere.
In depth, not really. Really, just a matter, are they really interesting to you? And then you might want to know the history of that time period. But I don't think the history itself is critical. But you could skip it if you really wanted to. I mean, I find it interesting in many ways, but you don't really need to go beyond the time period that interests you. Like to me, the Greeks are always the most interesting. Like I like knowing their different names and some history of like going from Socrates to Aristotle. It's just an interesting way to think of them and a way to integrate my thinking, not just in what's true, but how did people get there? You can't get to Aristotle without Socrates. So in that way, it might be valuable to read Plato because that's what Aristotle learned from Plato directly.
Right.
That was his teacher. So without Plato, there would be no Aristotle.
Yeah. You found there's tons of overlap, but like after you've studied objectivism, then you've gone to Aristotle, like tons of things. You don't need to put in like you've put in effort, but it's not as painful as it would be as if you'd already intensely studied.
I think so, yes. It's
Yeah.
not as painful.
Cool. Let's see what this is.
I would say a lot of the intrinsicist subjectivist stuff isn't critical to what you're trying to understand as far as concept formation, understanding concepts, better ways of thinking. it's more elaborating on the ways people go wrong.
Yeah.
And it's not, to know every reason why people go wrong isn't always that important. So he's just pointing out at least the general errors you want to know about. Don't recognize that there has to be a foundation to your ideas. Recognize where concepts come from. Are they inborn or not?
Yeah.
Are they folded in reality, or do you create them? Or in what way do you create them? And is there a world to understand? And can we understand it? And those are sort of questions he's expanding on.
Yeah, I can see. There's no point getting too deep in this. By the way, do you know anything about the age of anxiety? What's that? Is that a common? You've never heard that?
I do not recognize that term. I would bet it's from like Camus. Let me see.
Oh, okay.
It sounds like something Camus would say. Age of anxiety. It is. Oh, it's a poem by W.H. Auden. I don't know what that is. Never heard of this person. But I get, apparently it's.
Although, I guess I'm just thinking, I guess the benefit of having some broad overview of like philosophic history would be if you're looking for some specific ideas, or there's some problem you're working on, you might know who to turn to because you can categorize everyone in a way. But that's just speculation because I actually haven't studied any. So
yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, because sometimes in the history you want to know how the idea developed. Where did people start, and where did they end up?
Yeah,
like,
and there's. Yeah, sorry, continue.
Like what is presupposed by these later philosophers, things like that. Like a lot of the question. Sorry.
Yeah, go on. A lot of the questions.
Like a lot of the questions Socrates would talk about, those are fundamental to all of philosophy and still are. And Aristotle tried to answer those more explicitly.
Right.
So,
like what is virtue?
Yes, that, especially that.
There's probably also, I'm guessing you can tell me, like, if you approach, like, every time you study a philosopher, because there's going to be a lot of overlap between them, let's say you go further back, you might know to skip a whole bunch of things that are not like new and have already been covered or discussed previously, or you might skip over, there's probably heaps of conversations and arguments about questions or things that aren't really relevant right now. So you just extract, instead of reading like every single text a philosopher from ancient Greece wrote, you just read the relevant parts. Like you're not going to read, for example, Aristotle's treatise on zoology or something.
Yeah, you're right.
Maybe the intro and that's it. I don't know. So you could probably get through more and more as you read more.
Fortunately, with Aristotle, there's not so much material that you couldn't read at all. It's probably like maybe 3,000 pages worth. It's a while, but still.
Well, yeah, I mean, 3,000 pages depends, because what's this book is like 500, and look how long it's taking me to get my. So I don't know.
But at least to read
only 3,000 pages, yeah.
But
of dense abstract concepts.
Yes, but I forget where was I going with that. I don't remember.
You said it's only 3,000 pages, so it's
I don't remember where I was going with that though.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We'll